Sharn Town Council to order. Today is, what is today? Tuesday, June 11th. It is 3:05-ish PM. Today is really basically a work session. We had postponed this meeting originally scheduled for last week. For those of you who end up watching, but also for welcome Karen and Allison and Nick, but also for everybody here. This meeting really comes out of these very significant changes we've made. I won't say we were forced to make, but I'll say we've made pursuant to state legislation that passed. And I think at the second or third time we were redoing a section of our zoning ordinances to conform with state law. We talked about having a work session where we discuss a couple of things. One is kind of the beginning of what is the ordinance response to this? You know, so for example, if do we foresee increased density or decreased setbacks on non-conforming lots potentially becoming an issue? You know, there's a whole bunch of that type of stuff, which is you know, we may have to evolve over time, I understand, but I think it's worth sort of setting the stage and talking about what perhaps other towns are doing or what we ought to do. And the other is the thing that sticks out to me about the changes that we've made is the increased demands on our staff and department and the planning board, because it's going to be a lot different. You know, right now we have 1.5 overworked people trying to, you know, so sometimes I feel like one-armed paper hangers trying to keep up with stuff. And now it's sort of like, here's some new responsibilities. And you know, to me, I'll be positive about that. Maybe it's an opportunity to just sort of re-engineer that whole part of town government, you know, and figure out what is the best way to staff a department that has these responsibilities, and what is the best way to you know, review, you know, who should we have reviewing all of the applications? And I don't mean who in person, but like what's the most efficient way to do that? And you know, it vests for Jen, I think, some significant responsibilities in terms of administrative approvals that we have to make sure that whether it's Jen or John Smith are sort of adequately supported, both in terms of time, but also in terms of technical expertise, it seems to me. So anyway, blah, 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 but that's kind of what I think that encapsulates kind of what everybody was sort of thinking that we needed to start talking about. Did you do this doc? Was this your Allison? Hi, Allison.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fit. I'm fantastic. Were you intending maybe to go through this nicely colored
The table. Yeah, so
working document?
that table kind of provides you with an idea of the scope of the work involved in updating, the local regulation.
Right,
To state law changes. So that had been provided by Weston Sampson many months ago at the start of the project.
right, yes.
But I provided an implementation status update just showing what sections the town has already adopted, either the town council, zoning amendments or subdivision regulations adopted by the planning board. So giving you kind of a general idea of where we are in the process.
Yep.
And so there's still some sections that there's a number of sections that'll be on the planning board's agenda tomorrow. And so some of those will be moved forward to the town council. You'll see some of those highlighted in yellow. So
Those are the yellows, right?
yeah, you can anticipate those coming to you at a near meeting. And then so there's still some outstanding items, but a majority have been at a minimum adopted or at least drafted at this point. So I don't know that we need to necessarily walk through those in detail, but just to give you a status update of the project. But I believe Karen had prepared some remarks on, like, to provide, if you would like, some overall discussion on the bigger picture, like the roles and how they have
Sure.
changed. Like, so what's the role of the planning board, the town council, the administrative officer, and the town council and zoning board, and how those roles in general have changed due to the state law changes.
Can I ask you, Allison, I sort of gave my 5-minute introduction to this. Is this the right way to go about it? I mean, here's my feeling, my weird feeling. It's so odd that we pass these substantive ordinances because, we trust that those are what we needed to conform. I could not pass a quiz on them. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't. And that's a really awkward position to be in. And that's not, I don't mean that we haven't had the tutorial. I just mean, I just feel like I have not mastered these by any means. And
I don't think any of us have. I mean, it's all
yeah,
a lot of material to digest for anybody. So the planning board and the town council. So a lot of it's just required changes that we need to implement. And as projects come forward, applications come forward, you start working with that new language and navigating.
yeah,
So it's
right.
we have general idea, but none of us have it all memorized or a full understanding at this point of some potential outcomes.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but one of the questions I like to ask, and we can talk about this part of it later, but among these things, and this is Jen, Karen, Allison, like what sticks out at you as, or what worries you about it, or what sort of where do you feel like we need to put some time and attention in thinking about how we are going to manage and cope with this stuff, with the change. So again, that's not a give me your answer now. It's just we have to, assuming that there are either ordinance or staffing or organizational changes that we need to make, we're going to have to have some sense at least of priority, if you will,
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think most municipalities I haven't heard anyone discuss like a change in staffing. It's more the tasking that's changed, right? So, certain hours that may have been dedicated to administrative tasks as far as getting an application on a planning board agenda and minutes involved with that and reviewing it for the planning board would now be dedicated toward the administrative officer reviewing it and approving it in the office, right? So I don't know that necessarily equates to more hours at this point, but
Sure.
a change in process. And I think the biggest hurdle right now is just understanding that change of process, like the learning curve involved in understanding the process and how it's changed and how, things used to be, what everyone was used to, how understanding what each application will now involve as far as a process and utilizing, a technical review committee to assist the administrative officer and in some instances with reviewing applications. So certain applications that had gone to the planning board would be approved administratively with the potential assistance of a technical review committee that involves more staff on that. And I think as far as dividing up between planning and zoning, we did provide a lot of input to Weston and Sampson when crafting the ordinance, changes to give direction as to the preference of the town. So there still will be a lot of applications going to the zoning board to try to not overwhelm the planning board. So pulling out required development plan review from much of the zoning ordinance so that projects would still go to the zoning board, but requesting an advisory or a recommendation from the planning board to still get their input. So we did try to navigate that a little bit in how the language was crafted. So, the concern of the planning board having a overwhelming agenda and the zoning board not, reviewing any projects. So we have tried to keep things as similar to what the town is used to within the confines of state law, right? So,
Right. Right.
Hey, can I ask, so taking all the changes into consideration and the fact that the staff and the zoning board and the planning board, and you guys, it sounds like everybody's still getting up to speed. Is there so if a homeowner puts in an application, what's the time frame in which, are there time limits
yes.
under which they should expect an answer, and have those been lengthened at all to accommodate for the changes?
Not lengthened, but no, depending on the application, there are statutory requirements as far as how long, decision needs to be made by, action needs to be taken that are laid out in the ordinance. Depending on if it's a subdivision, a minor subdivision, major subdivision, how long it needs to be certified complete by the administrative officer. So those are dictated by state law.
Right. I just was wondering if there was any extra time built in to
No.
accommodate for everyone getting up to speed.
No,
Is it normal for the legislature to pass this many changes at once?
no,
No.
it's an overhaul. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it.
I've got a couple of questions that I should have asked a very long time ago. Jen had kind of given me a heads up on this, and I thought that this can't be real, and it sort of went away.
I know.
But
I know.
it's something like, what did you say, 73% of our lots are substandard?
You know what, Jen, and pull up chairs so we can just all sit here, okay? Do you mind?
Yeah.
Then you guys don't have to jump up with that.
Allison, I think you ran the substandard lots and said 76% were substandard, but I'm not sure if that was the residential zones or the entire island. But it's
Not sure. I can go back to my notes.
I would
while
say
we're
it's
speaking.
probably 75% are substandard.
I might have just looked at the RA zone.
Okay.
But I can double check while
Yeah,
we're
maybe-
discussing it. If we want to get into further detail on that.
Well, I think everybody can look at their own road. I looked at my own road, of course, and 19 lots down there. 3 of them are actually sort of meet zoning. 3 of them have more than the right amount of acreage. And
3 out of 19.
3 out of 19, and 2 of those are larger than all the rest of them put together. And I'm one of the larger ones, and this is like the 3rd time that, well, not the 3rd time, but it feels like, did anybody look at what they were really doing to people who had, this is probably the wrong question for you. This is a question for the legislature. What were they thinking when they did this?
Not about Block Island would be the answer.
Well, we know
Yeah.
that, but there have to be other places like where I am.
Yeah,
besides
there
Block
are a
Island.
lot of issues like that. The intent, as I understand it, of the overhaul was to streamline the process and make it, more efficient, and also to encourage housing. So with that in mind, and due to just the sheer number of changes, I don't think anybody's really surprised that we're dealing with issues specific to cities and towns and how some of this language plays out in a negative way. So you're not alone in that. This is a learning curve. For land use nerds like me, it's fantastically exciting, but to everyone else, I get it, not so much. But when you're talking about the substandard lot issue, and I think we've had discussions about this one before for New Shoreham, it sounds like the best course of action would be to consider putting an issue like that, or, anything else that comes up for you like that, on a planning board agenda, so that the planning board can take a look at it, refer it to your staff so they can look at it, come back, have a planning board hearing, and then what happens then is the planning board would recommend to the council any sort of a zoning amendment change that they see or feel would be helpful to address that negative impact. That would be the process under state law. And I think
Sure.
where these issues are being identified, I think that might be an avenue to get them addressed.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that sticks out to me, and I think all of us, is sort of the changes on these non-conforming lots. I can virtually guarantee you that I and Martha and Molly and Neil and Tristan will at some point in the next 12 months have someone irate that that something is being built on. How could we possibly have let that happen?
You've already got one irate person right here. You haven't been down the Mansion Road. This is exactly the kind of thing, and this is my personal experience. I probably shouldn't even be talking to it, but it's reality. I live in a 3-acre zone. Next door to me is a 2-acre lot. It's pre-existing, non-conforming, been that way forever. It's surrounded by stone walls. And right now I have on that lot, and it's legal, a little cape that was torn down. A new cape has been built that I guess isn't going to have a kitchen. Is I correct, Jen? And a 3-story house. That's what's gone up in place of the small cape. And that's all legal, which has nothing to do with this zoning, but it sure makes me not really have any faith in any land use in the state of Rhode Island at this point.
So now they could actually build more than what they were.
Yes.
planning for.
And they could
and
build
that's the thing.
more. And
Yes.
up the road, there are lots that, and this is, they were all pre-existing. There are lots that are 0.44 acres that nobody even realizes how small they are. The Pierce, Huggins, that whole strip. And they're these little houses, and they were these little summer cottages and didn't bother anybody. And now they can turn into monstrosities. And I don't know what's, or they can turn into, they're not going to solve any, believe me, nobody who buys a piece of land on the Mansion Road is buying it for year-round housing.
Karen, do you see, are there other changes sort of in the pipeline that we should be looking out for? I know this is a lot right here that I already don't understand, but is there more coming?
Well, why
for
not
me
add to it,
to
Molly?
struggle with?
When you say more changes, do you mean changes at the state level or changes at the town level?
Changes at the state level
So
that you see on the horizon?
Potentially, yes, there are some changes that were presented early on this session that are now moving towards maybe approval towards the end of the week when the legislature finishes up. They all seem to be cleanup of issues that have been identified as a result of the sweeping changes. I can't really comment right now either way on how that will, affect the changes we've made to date, because I don't know which ones are going to pass. So I guess that the best way to answer your question is yes, there are potentially more changes that could get passed this week. They are more of a minor nature than these sweeping changes, and it's my impression that they are intended as more cleanup.
So that means a bunch of stuff that Molly is struggling harder than I to understand may well get undone.
I wouldn't go that far, no.
Mhm.
Well, if it's
No.
cleanup,
Clarifying language maybe, like when
Yeah.
there are inconsistencies, but as far as the substantive, like the policy changes or procedural changes, that nothing substantive will change. It's more, there were some like inconsistencies in state law or language that needed clarification, so it's more cleanup, not a redoing of what was done last session. And the other thing is they're still, dealing with the ADU bill, so that's in flux. And then the other one of concern to some communities would be the residential by right and commercial and industrial
Right.
districts. So those two, I think, are the most being tracked by the planners, association. And but
I happened to be there on the day that was being heard, that the residential by right and commercial zones. And it struck me that while I understood the arguments those towns were making, it was unlikely to be terribly relevant for us.
yeah, compared to other communities, the
Yes,
impacts
compared to
will be
other
greater in other communities.
yeah.
Yes, right.
And if there are questions that I can answer about the changes, I know it's a lot. I'm certainly, happy to walk you through some of the more major changes, or, my office has put together a kind of an instructional memorandum that's a reference. I'm happy to pass that along through Millie, whatever I can do to
Yeah, I think that
help
would
you understand.
I think that would be helpful. One of the things that I think would be most helpful, at least for me, and it may be premature, but some strategic advice around this. So in other words, if there were a shared concern in the community about build outs on non-conforming lots that seem to exceed what I'll describe, for lack of a better word, the character of the landscape that we have. Are there things that we could do? For example, could we make more lots conforming? Could we, I mean, theoretically, these things can go both ways. You could change zoning in an area from 3-acre zoning to 2-acre zoning and potentially knock out a whole bunch of technically non-conforming lots, right?
Yes,
mean,
that's one
The
approach.
math would work that way.
129.
Yeah, and I don't know whether that, I literally have no idea whether that's a good idea, so please. But it just strikes me that there might well be some fairly valuable strategic moves that we could make with our zoning ordinances that would eliminate a lot of the things that we're concerned about.
And I think now that I've issued 25, roughly around 25 substandard lots worksheets.
Yeah.
But the good news is 4 of them are for 513. So
Oh, that's
a
great.
positive.
Yes.
Great.
And they wouldn't have been able to do it without it. So that's really good.
That Gail did that.
But I would take this to the planning board and kind of provide them with the data that I see.
Yeah.
And the planning board would work on coming up with some suggestions and submit them to the town council for review. So I
Yeah.
think if we could ever get caught up on the planning board agenda, because
Yeah.
2 pages for
Right.
tomorrow night, maybe
Yes.
August, we would put that on the
Yeah.
agenda and maybe have some time to focus on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's definitely ways to do it, to change the language in the ordinance.
Is the
So we
family,
don't have
um,
5-foot setbacks,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
some of them are 5-foot setbacks.
Yeah,
And
right.
I don't think neighbors will be happy when they see a building going up 5 feet from the property line.
Right.
And I'm gonna put on the zoning board agenda, just a report from the zoning official and provide at least the plat and lot fire number information. So
Right.
in case somebody needs to know that that's happening, at least there is a document.
By the way, if you're doing that in August and Gail and Margie think it would be, and you think it would be worthwhile, we can also notice it as a council meeting if you want to kill two birds with one stone and sort of start talking through some of this stuff.
I feel like the planning board probably needs to really work
Digest
on
it,
it and
yeah,
then by,
yeah.
before they
Yep.
even go
Yep.
anywhere with
Sure.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
And really see what direction that they should even go with, like
Yeah.
increasing lot size, changing the minimum requirements, there's all different ways
right.
to do it.
So I wonder, like, if it's you guys who have a real understanding of this because you work with it every day, if it's a lot for you to take in, certainly not anything I work with on an average day, so it's a super lot for me to take in. But I'm thinking for the average homeowner who, like you said, is going to be surprised, not pleasantly, when their neighbor starts building a shed or a barn or a house 5 feet off the property line. Like, how do we get this information out to them or just? they
Well,
have
I mean,
to-
there's no notice to abutters for something like this. It's allowed by right, so but I would
Okay,
still put a monthly report on the zoning board agenda to receive it. We're not gonna discuss it,
right,
because there's nothing to discuss, but at least, the public could look
Right.
at that and say, oh, Jennifer Phillips, plat 7 lot 135. Okay, well, what are they doing? And
So this is a
how-
great opportunity to understand the new law, I think. So you get whatever setback relief by right pursuant to the new statute.
yes, and anyone could do the calculation.
Sure.
I've been doing them because I would have to check them anyway.
Sure,
For
yeah.
anyone.
So I'm just
Yeah.
whatever, Keith Stover has a 10,000 square foot lot. And that is non-conforming and therefore he gets setback relief
And lot coverage increase.
and lot coverage increase. And that is no longer a question for planning or for zoning. It is now a by right
Correct.
approval.
Yes.
And that's how the new law works. I mean, I know that's really basic, but it's a really helpful for me to utter those few sentences.
So the description on here says revised dimensional standards for substandard lots and clarify that substandard lots are not required to seek zoning relief solely for lot size. So if someone wanted to build on a substandard lot, is there anything that sends them to planning or zoning at this point?
If they exceed this new change where they do get an increase in lot building coverage, say that it's 4% in the residential A zone and this form that I complete for them grants them 8 and they want 10, then they'd have to go to the zoning board.
Okay,
Or large house, anything that triggers any of those thresholds.
so there are still triggers
Yes.
that will like.
Less,
But if someone says, I just want to build this very modest house on my very modest lot, they can likely avoid the triggers.
yes.
They're
absolutely,
also less,
absolutely.
they're also, I would argue, I don't know if this is a good word, but they can be less modest than they were. Because you're basically, you get so much relief on lot coverage and setback that all of a sudden a pretty big house can be squeezed into a pretty small,
Sure.
we would
Yeah.
consider to be a small lot. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, some of them are substantial, depending on the size of the lot and the zone. There's 5 in the RB and 20 in the RA, so. And again, I'm only really completing the forms if someone has an active permit, because I
Sure,
couldn't sit here
right,
all day
Of
and
course, yeah,
have 700
Yeah.
people ask to do it,
Yeah.
so it.
Can I ask a question?
please.
I'm wondering, and I should know this answer, but are all these notations in green, all these new ordinances, are they all on the town website now?
Anything adopted.
Anything adopted is on the website. And so now when you go onto the website, you can no longer see both. You're only seeing the new, or you're just
Hasn't
seeing
been-
amendments,
Well, you have to go to the ordinance and then you go to amendment, so it's
Okay,
a separate file.
okay.
It hasn't been codified into one
Okay,
document
I guess
yet.
that was my question. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
Keisha's really dropped the ball.
Jen, would you say, I mean, we're,
I know. That's why I felt comfortable teasing her about it.
I have to wait until we finish some of it.
Yeah.
And can
There's
I
a
ask-
lot on the planning board.
so there's a lot of changes here, but would you say that that is the most impactful change
That I have seen, yeah,
that you see for Block Island?
Yes.
Okay.
so far. I mean, we have 5 applications on the planning board agenda under UDI, which UDR, that
And what does
So
that
that's-
stand for?
Unified Development Review, and so that's. a
What, and what
completely
qualifies
different-
something as a,
Well, it would have been a year-long process that was condensed into 2 for 5 applications. They're changes. So, I mean,
You-
there's still notice to abutters and it's a public hearing, so
Yeah.
people can come and speak. But
if-
wait, there's no notice?
No,
to
there
it?
is
Oh,
for
there
that
is. Okay. And,
process.
but what does that stand for? What would be
Unified
an
Development
example of that?
Review, if it has a planning board, like a subdivision, and then they need zoning board, like, special use permit variances, it all gets reviewed by the planning board. It no longer goes to the zoning.
Doesn't go both places the way that it used to.
So this would be like if someone wanted to create lots out of a larger lot, or,
That would be the subdivision, so, I mean.
It goes back to, you know, what Karen had mentioned about streamlining the process. So here, Unified Development Review, which had been optional for communities, and some communities already utilize this, UDR is now required. So if a development application requires planning board review and also relief from zoning, the planning board becomes the permitting authority for both. So it would only go to the planning board and not need to go to zoning board. So again, just trying to like streamline the process and not having applications be bumped back and forth between the boards. So as Jen mentioned, right, so if you have a subdivision that requires any type of, also involves a special use permit or a variance, the planning board can make, is authorized to make the decision on the zoning relief, and it doesn't need to go to the zoning board.
So-
And that concerns me as a planning board member, if I may interject, because that's another learning process that we haven't had time, or we haven't had the time to be educated on
Mhm.
what constitutes granting of the variance, and what are the criteria for granting a variance. And I guess we just have to.
Right.
we have
I
to
think
really
that's a
focus
keeper
on
point
this.
because that raises for me, do we need to, either Allison or Karen or Jen or, Wesson and whatever their name is, does there need to be, I'm sorry.
Weston.
Weston and Sampson. Do we need to, do, an education, thing or a tutorial or,
Right.
does
I
that?
think that Allison and Karen and I have been trying
Yeah,
to do that with
right,
each
sure.
application, once we understand them.
Right,
And
yes,
figure it out,
absolutely.
then, I mean, we're kind of working together. all the-
Yeah.
all
Oh,
the time.
totally.
But I guess one question on a planning board perspective also is, if a unified plan development, or the proper term for what we're discussing, is there an opportunity for the planning board to say, we still would like to see the zoning board review this? Or is it, can it be deemed not a unified plan development so that it can go through two processes if it's, looks like a complex application?
I don't
No.
know the answer to that. I mean, Karen. could
No.
speak to that, But
They
I,
cannot.
Okay.
If an application needs both a planning board and a zoning board approval, it's got to go before the planning board for unified development review. And I have, like I said before, I have a couple of things, a couple of memos on that I've sent over. I'll resend them over, and I'll send over the kind of reference document that my office has prepared. My hope is that it would be useful for you, Gail, during a hearing, so that as you're sitting there and you have questions and you can't get to me, you could flip through this and get the answer. On just what you're talking about, the standard that you have to follow to approve, and some other things. And also I'm here. If there's any questions that you have that you think of in the meantime, just, ask Jen. She can email me, however you want to get that question to me.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, I guess, for Allison. You said that approximately 76% of the lots on the island are substandard. So what percentage of lots do you think would even qualify for this UPD process? Like, how many lots are out there that could even be?
couldn't guess that because there's so many variables to a process like that.
Yeah, but
So like you-
Unrelated, those two things are unrelated. So, the substandard lot issue is separate from UDR applies to any 100% of the lots on the island.
oh,
it's just-
okay. So I'm
Yeah.
misunderstanding this.
So
Yeah.
like off the top of my head, I would say projects that would come under UDR now would be the West Side 20, Cherry Hill.
So we're not talking about like
Um,
taking a large piece of property and dividing it into, like taking a 10-acre property and dividing it into
they could do
3-acre
that.
lots. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like,
Well, they could. So for the housing board, because they also need a special use permit, they did have to bounce back and forth quite a bit
okay,
between the boards. Now they would just go to the planning board. So,
Right.
I mean, we
right.
have applications right now. I'm like going around the island in my head, trying to think of
Right.
properties where we have had,
I mean, probably for the houses going up right now across from the school,
no,
right?
that would go under, the DPR, development plan review,
Oh.
which would be reviewed by the planning board
So that's different.
and
Okay.
not the zoning board. Unless they need, even if they needed a height variance or a side yard variance or something, it would all go to the planning board. But if we take the requirement of development plan review out of the large house ordinance that's on the agenda tomorrow and 513, that will put it back to the zoning board where they're reviewing it. The planning board's issuing an advisory and kind of that's what we see a lot. We see those
And
applications.
does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Is that possible to do? Question for Allison and,
Karen?
Karen?
That's part of the packet for tomorrow.
Okay.
On number 1 that there's so
Okay.
many of them.
Right.
Yeah.
and actually that leads to just one more question for me is everything in yellow what we're hearing tomorrow? And everything in green we've already discussed? Because unfortunately I missed a lot of the winter meetings this year.
I think so.
Generally, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Mhm.
The
Green's been
greens-
adopted. The yellow is mostly like what's in your packet. I think just
The-
about everything. There's might be a couple things not moving forward on that yellow, but
At 4.
Right, the green stuff is now in our ordinances.
Yeah.
yes.
The good news is we're up to 64 accessory dwelling units, the 513s.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
incredible.
very happy about
Yeah,
that.
Some good news. Yeah, that's great. 14 in the last 2 years.
And while these all the green highlighted topics had been adopted, really no changes could have been made substantially even at the meetings, correct? They really have to be discussed separately by planning and then introduced to the council for approval?
So
Well-
there's two tracks. The zoning ordinance changes are that they're reviewed by the planning board and then a recommendation is given to the council to pass. However, the changes to the subdivision regulations for the town, that is under the purview of the planning board itself. So the planning board would draft those, review those and adopt those themselves. So you've got two different paths depending on what you're amending.
Okay.
What strikes you as the thing that's going to be most challenging about this, Jim?
Short-term rental license,
Yeah.
asked. If that passes this month,
Mhm.
yeah, just, it'll be a lot more added to the staff.
It certainly will be.
I mean, I'm preparing for it.
Yep.
Because I have a feeling it will pass and that's okay, but it'll just, I mean, I don't think we know yet what changes are gonna, like staffing changes or anything. I mean, I don't think we know the answer to any of that yet.
Right.
Based on, because we're still working on the amendments.
Right. Sort of on the land use side, you know what I mean? Like leaving staffing out, just obviously suspending the staffing side of it. Is it is the thing that, sort of, you've been at this for a long time. So like, what is the thing that scratches the back of your neck when when you read this stuff? Is it the build out of non-conforming lots?
It's non-conforming lots,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Because the potential to have a 5-foot setback without notice to the abutters is not the process we follow. And that's not what, no, it just depends on the size of the lot. I mean, it's based on how, if it's 50% substandard, 33% substandard, so it's all a calculation based on size. Yes, and then you take the number, like the setback. So if it's 50 feet or 25 feet or 5 feet, and then it's based off of that. And increased in lot building coverage.
And you feel like that's more effort and time for you because you're gonna be fielding a lot of negative phone calls, or?
I'm not worried about myself, I'm just worried about the neighbors.
Yeah.
And
Right,
how
right.
people would feel when they have no idea that a property is gonna build on a substandard lot and potentially really close to them, so.
So right now,
the thing
if,
that works
if
me.
my neighbor, started building 5 feet from the lot line, right? Is there a way that I, as an abutter or just a curious resident,
Mhm.
can look that up online? Can I go on to OpenGov and look up
Everyone
that?
can go on.
So everyone can go on
Accessible.
to OpenGov and look up their neighbors' building permits and,
You can search it by fire number, by property owner's name, yep, okay, the contractor's.
is
name.
vision appraisal linked with
Yeah, it is.
OpenGov?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, that's all the data for the tax assessors. And it's
So-
not always 100% up, like I see a lot of properties that their sheds or garages or what have you aren't on it. It's just that the assessor's file wasn't up to date at the time of the change. I think, I don't know how often they change those, but every once in a while you find it, but not that readily, but
So Gail, do you expect in your professional life that these non-conforming lots are going to become increasingly attractive with this? Is that, I would assume that or is that not the case?
no, because people are either looking for land or they're not. looking
Yeah,
for
right,
land,
right.
Because they haven't found the house they want to find.
Yeah,
Does it open up, you have to in your profession tell people what they can do with their
Sure,
lot.
yeah.
We don't ask anyone to quote us because you really have to sit down with a zoning
Yeah,
official
right.
to determine exactly what you can do, but you can now say what we said for years, this lot is built out by looking at visual
Right.
appraisal, by doing the math, just doing rough rudimentary math. You can tell if a lot is built out, but now a lot of them will not be because the acre minimum was 2 acres for so long for the majority. Well, I
Mhm.
guess that was 1989, it was changed, right? So maybe it's not that 1989 is a long time ago. It's just yesterday. I guess it's longer now that it's been 3 acre than 2, but there were certainly a lot of 2 acre lots already established.
When you look at this map of privately owned lots in RA, substandard lots by size, you really sort of get a sense. This is, I think did you, this one?
I don't know where that came from.
Do you know where this comes from?
That map,
Yeah.
Allison, I
It's
believe.
Oh, it's
green
from
and, yeah.
Allison. Yeah. You really kind of get a sense of how impactful
Mhm.
it's like. And that's kind of as I said earlier, the thing that worries me is the way that we have come to expect the landscape to appear could really be substantially changed.
I think a lot of it can be misleading because
Oh, thanks.
I mean, I really come to believe 3 acre zoning was a mistake. I think a lot of people subdivided before 3 acre zoning went through that wouldn't have otherwise. And a lot of the pre-existing now, because the neck, so I can get this right, when zoning went in the 60s, the 1 acre zoning on the neck went all the way to Mansion Road. So that's why some of the minister's lot, nobody knows how that got built. Everybody thinks they do, but nobody does. And everybody has a different story. And Sheep's Meadow's 1 acre and that's legal. And then that got changed to the 2 acre. So the 2 acre is legal. But the 1 was pre-existing non-conforming, the 2 is pre-existing non-conforming. That was done all over the island all through the 80s when they were subdividing like mad. So I mean, to me, it's almost as if you need a map that has the ones that were legally subdivided and the ones that were pre-existing non-conforming to start. Because those
Yeah, you're
are
right.
the real problems.
Yes,
that
definitely, you're totally correct.
It's like
Because,
that-
Like Sheep's Meadow, because it was part of a subdivision, probably doesn't qualify for the substandard lot reduction and increase.
I think,
And
it-
some-
well, yeah, I think,
But I'm not sure,
think-
and
Those are just regular, I've sold
There-
those are just regular lots
yeah.
of record. They're.
as
they're
of March
associated-
4th, 1989.
They're
correct?
not
Oh, yeah.
cluster subdivisions.
Right,
Yeah.
so it depends on each lot, because some of them could be substandard and they were part of a subdivision, so a subdivision.
Right.
But aren't those legally
But
aren't those legally
Sheep's Meadow are all
pre-existing?
legally
Every-
subdivided and-
Right, but I'm saying it
Substandard.
might, depending on when, it might not qualify to,
Not for extra lot coverage
Exactly.
or bonus.
especially if the
bonuses.
planning board puts any kind of dimensional standards on the recorded plan, or if it wasn't established, if it was established after March 4th, 1989. So it depends on some,
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah,
that
it's
was
not
after
as-
89 and subdivision was what, 72, I think?
I don't know the answer to that,
I think it is.
but I know
Mhm.
that if it's after March 4th, 1989,
New Minister's Lot is different because they're condominiums, but Sheep's Meadow, they're each on their own lot.
right?
They just
yeah.
have an HOA.
But because it's part of a subdivision, we'd have to look at the maps and all of the recorded documents to determine whether or not they qualify to have increased lot.
Hmm.
You don't think it was for Sheep's Meadow?
Thank you.
don't think it was subdivided. I don't think they were doing subdivisions back then.
I thought I saw that name on like old planning board documents, but I could be wrong. I haven't looked at it. Okay.
That are filed.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's that whole Max Grant plant that has those little tiny lots across from, well, that finally have been gotten out of the pipeline across from the State Beach and I think there are still quite a few of those over around the Harbor Pond. Those were little tiny lots and
So
there
those
a
would-
lot of things like
Yeah,
that.
if they're existing. A better example would be like the West Side 20, it was after
Yeah.
1989.
right.
So, and part of it subdivision that has setbacks on the recorded plan, so it wouldn't, those lots wouldn't qualify for,
I see.
at
But-
least
but-
that's my understanding. I could be
didn't-
wrong.
I didn't realize there was a time frame attached to
I,
it.
I thought it was
says, well, if
after
you look under
89.
the lot area and then I read the state law and then compared it to what we had, it seemed like March, and confirmed it with Karen, it was March 4th, 1989.
Hmm.
Because by that time, everything was, that's what I said, there was a rush on 2-acre lots before that went through, because it took quite a while to get it through. And after that, everything was 3 acres, so.
But overall, the worksheets that I did complete, I mean, a couple of them are just like a expansion of a deck, of a staircase, a shed, a second floor. I mean, they were not 513, a 513, another 513. So they're not, right now, I haven't seen anything that a major
Right.
Well, nobody knows.
construction
about-
project.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they haven't applied, they won't apply for something.
Sure.
These are pretty much like homeowners I have been working with.
Right.
Well, I can't imagine that people would want a super max out property, but I can certainly imagine they'd want to increase. I mean, we need only look at Galilee
That's exactly.
and
Exactly.
Jerusalem.
Yeah. And not just there, all up and down the coast. But it just no better, no worse sort of zoomed out, but it's a totally different look and feel. You know, all right.
But it still, it doesn't mean that if it's a substandard lot that's 50% substandard, they're gonna get an increase in lot coverage, but it might not be as much as what you're thinking.
Sure.
So,
Wait, what does that mean when you say something is 50% substandard?
so if it's in the residential A zone, you need 120,000 square feet. So if the lot is 60,000, they're gonna get a 50% increase in the lot building coverage.
Okay,
I think that's what happens at our
50%, so for setbacks, it's
I think,
50 feet
right?
front side, rear, so maybe you get 25. So if the lot is like 6,000 square feet in the residential zone,
Already on Beacon Hill.
But as you said, these had to have been subdivided before 89?
the lot has to exist as of March 4th, 1989.
Okay, that's an important part of the equation because
Yeah, but it's not pre-existing non-conforming unless it, was done before 89.
Most, yeah, most lots.
Well, I thought-
would
so there's a
say-
difference between
Mm,
pre-existing
feasibility is
non-conforming and just non-conforming.
Well,
because
it depends on what, if you're talking about the building on it or for this, for doing the calculations for lot area increase and setback decrease. So you couldn't subdivide your lot tomorrow and then the next day come in and say, well, now I want to take advantage of. You know what I mean? Like create this,
Right,
create a
right, right.
substandard,
Got it. Okay.
Yes,
That, now I
Subdivision.
get it.
that makes sense. That makes
at
sense.
least. That's my
Hey,
understanding.
Karen,
Right.
Hey,
could you send your office's
Yeah.
sort of tutorial or whatever you're calling it to Millie so that she can share it? Because just be helpful to be able to read through that.
sending
And-
now.
And I want to thank you and Allison and Jen for, and Gail for her time. I know this is largely my own ruminations about this, and it's just very, very helpful because we will get questions about this as we move along. And I don't want to be caught in a place, I know it's planning's responsibility, but I don't want to be caught in a place where we're not contemplating potential fixes, or, you know, or however you describe it, potential changes, you know, until after, troubling things happen, you know, that's really what I.
I think
I'm
I
glad
did
your-
just
I'm
want to
glad your
offer,
microphone was off.
um, regarding the substandard lots, I believe this is one that there is some cleanup that's going to be happening.
Oh, really?
At the State House. So not necessarily changing the policy again, but I think there definitely was some language in there that is confusing, and municipalities are interpreting it different ways and how they're calculating this
Right.
reduction. So there might be some cleanup language there and an example of how it's calculated within the law. And so, you know, I think we'll know more in a few weeks. And I'm not aware of any communities that have like tried to counteract this at this point. But I did overhear maybe, I think it was Narragansett, but a reduction, like reducing their setbacks. Oh, I'm sorry, increasing the setbacks as a way of counteracting it, but also I think what New Shoreham's discussing might be an approach as far as decreasing the minimum lot size, not globally within RA, but kind of doing an analysis, and when there's certain sections that have majority of the lots that smaller size, you know, considering reducing the lot size in that area.
Sure.
So, but I think we'll know more in you know, a month or two.
Right.
Is there any?
Has there been, or is there included, I have no idea, of a minimum house size on these substandard lots?
Well, you would have to comply with the large house ordinance, but.
And how does that work? Is that in proportion to
Well, it
the,
could be, no, it could be living space, it could be gross area, it could be, a wall plane,
yeah, I mean,
so, there are limitations to the size without a special use permit, so that you-
Deal with the house size, right?
there's by right, there's a special use permit and then
Right.
prohibited, so
I'm-
that could,
That's an interesting approach. Yeah.
I'm thinking of the lots that are less than half an acre.
there's no mitigation for the size.
That's what I'm
It
asking.
could be a large house. I mean, it could be substantial.
And I think there are a lot more of those around than people, all you have to do is look at the plat map. It's not,
But if you related somehow house size, just bear with me for a second. If you had house size rules,
We do.
yeah, theoretically, you could use that as a way to mitigate. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea.
and that would come under whichever is smaller or larger. I
Mhm.
can't process that right now, but
Right, so lots under 1 acre could only have 1,200.
2,000 per house. Yeah, right.
So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just put some, you put. some
Yes,
standards
right.
in
Right.
Relation to the lot size or the lot area, and then. So that's where, so the right of way where you would usually, like, people. If you have a large right of way going through your property.
Yeah.
Now, so you can deduct that from your lot size, which becomes your lot area, and then the calculations are based on that.
Right.
Well, you wouldn't get the increase or the reduction in the setbacks. So say if you had a lot size of 120,000 square feet and you had a 10,000 square foot right of way, your lot area is 110. So then your 4% is based on 110 and not 120.
But now you might be eligible for,
So
Now
now
you might get a little bit more
right,
because of it.
got
It's
it.
gonna go both ways. like,
Yeah,
Where it
right.
doesn't give you that much, but then one lot it did.
Yeah.
Because it was such a.
And what
substantial-
about wetlands? They still,
Hasn't really. come
that
in-
hasn't changed.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'm just curious,
Yes.
like, trying to think of the other things that they remove from
Mhm.
your formula, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We do have one lot, we do have one application before the planning board right now that's, their, the proposal is to build within the 50-foot setback. So,
Onto wetlands?
well, I mean, there's a 50-foot buffer. So, yes. Located inside that buffer.
That's the one that has DEM
Yeah.
approval already, right?
No, that's the one that doesn't, right? That's.
There's one that doesn't, there's one that
that
does.
doesn't, Right.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yes, you're correct.
Great.
I don't like making DEM. I don't like making decisions prior to DEM
No,
review.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, usually the board sees DEM approval before the board, the local approval, and then CRM sees after,
Right.
at least in the last 25,
Yep.
8 years.
Yep.
I mean, that can be problematic depending upon what your neighbor did to stop up flow of water. And the overgrowth out there is maybe.
Well, this accomplished a lot of what I had hoped, which is to just start this conversation. So I just really, again, appreciate your time, Allison, Karen, Jen, Gail. Are there any other questions before we adjourn?
Oh, I just want to tell you that we do have, on this, at the end of this very lengthy agenda, the planning board is looking at, talking about the approved plans
Oh, yeah,
portion of the 513. I
yeah.
couldn't think of what it was even
Yeah.
called. The expedited.
The
review
models,
process.
yes, yes.
I couldn't think of it. Well, we don't have them yet, but we're still working
Yeah. That's cool.
on that. So
So-
hopefully. we-
Fantastic.
Your meeting, planning board meeting is tomorrow
At
at 4, and that one is, people can watch that one also?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm just thinking in case people like are watching this meeting and they want to
Mhm.
watch that meeting. Okay. Right, right.
Correct.
I just want to clarify it for public.
Yes.
Okay.
Zoning, planning, HDC, conservation are all on Zoom. Or YouTube, sorry.
Jen and Gail, while you're here, does it drive, apparently, I seem to be the only person that's driven crazy by this, that HTC has no correlation to zoning.
Well, they do because it's specifically in
No.
New Harbor, Old Harbor. Is that what you mean, or you mean?
Well, it was.
Across the board.
When HTC was put in, it was the Old Harbor, New Harbor Commercial Zone, which was one zone, and residential C. And then in 1989, when Old Harbor, New Harbor, service utility, mixed use, et cetera, came into play, the lines were never reconfigured. So something like, and I thankfully, Frank is, I think, doing a decent job on that building that should have been an HDC. You know, the Barrington should have been an HDC,
Mhm.
and it wasn't because they were in residential B, and that never got.
Yeah, I would love to see it just follow
Yeah.
the zoning. I mean, because it just for when we're looking at the property.
It just makes it
easier to
Karen,
figure
did you follow that
figure
question?
out. The line is out.
I did not.
not
Is the question,
Although,
how are the two tied together?
Well, they're not.
the-
That's the whole point.
the-
When zoning, I'm sorry.
No.
When zoning was, when HDC was, when the Historic District Commission was, when the Historic District was created,
Mhm.
the plat maps were in their, kind of in their infancy.
Okay.
And the zoning was simply drawn on a map. It was the zoning we had in town was residential A, B, C, and commercial, which was the entirety of the Old Harbor, New Harbor, the corridor in between. And then there was some coastal zone that was always, nobody ever was sure what it was. It moved a lot. And then when zoning was redone in 1989, which was in fact 35 years ago. We still think of it as the new zoning.
Exactly.
Nothing,
Longer time than the other.
and nothing was ever done to correlate it. So I think the reasoning behind the original HDC was that it was business and residential C. You had more of the older, the buildings that people think of as commercial, resident, as historic, and you also had a little more latitude with your buildings. And those were that was the area that people wanted to protect. And it always falls through the cracks. And I bring it up every now and then and I
But-
never write it down.
Wouldn't the answer for that would be just, if you're thinking of those areas, like mixed use should be in historic district? Simply.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, that's why I was asking Karen whether
So
she
you
got
could
the
ask the
drift there.
planning board to
because-
take a look at that. You could ask, yeah, send it
Okay.
to the planning board and.
So I thought of it when
Make
the,
an amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the planning board can study that for you and then they can offer up if they believe that it should be either a map change or an
what if-
ordinance change, they could
what
make
if-
a recommendation to the council to have that
They
change
don't
considered.
believe it. Well, like, for example, it's apparently something that nobody even thinks about because we just had a change of Rose Farm Inn from, what was that, from residential,
Not final yet, so
Well,
yes, it's pending.
it was from residential B to
CRC.
RC, and that's something that I think should be, if you were going to have uniformity. And a lot of what's driving my concern about this is just make it easier.
Yes, right. Yeah, you're right. Exactly.
Mhm.
Just make the lines easier. Yeah, absolutely. So Karen, to do that, we would put something on the town council agenda to discuss and request that the planning take a look at this.
Yeah, I don't even think it needs to be that formal. I think that if there's issues that staff has identified as issues that should go beyond, should be on the agenda for planning board, I think your staff is able to put those on the agenda.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I mean, if that's the consensus, I mean, it's easier to explain to a homeowner if they're in the.
Yes,
historic
exactly. You're either in
economics
or you're out.
Rather
Yeah,
than looking at.
yeah.
the Map, but it's.
Yeah.
Up to you. If you want the lines the way they are, then if you don't.
I'm with you and Martha. I mean, I think it would make it easier to just have it consistent with the zoning map. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, great. Yes. Can I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed or adjourned. Karen and Allison, thank you guys.
Have a good night. Thanks.
This is very helpful to me.